Good afternoon and welcome back to the Never Told to Lift podcast and this month's live question and answer episode. So in these episodes, I am here to answer your questions about strength training as an older adult, particularly in the beginner phases. So if you haven't quite started yet and you want to take those first few steps either in the gym or working out from home, and you just want to clarify a few things before you start, then this is a perfect opportunity. If you have started and you're still fairly new to it, you're not quite sure how to progress, or you've run into a couple of problems and you just want to work on those or ask any questions before you move on, then again, please do use these sessions. They're on the first Wednesday of every month at 12 o'clock. So if you're watching this live, I have the chat feature on YouTube, so you can just type a message in the chat, that'll come up to me. I'll bring your question up on screen. If I can feel I can answer it straight away, I will. If I feel I need a bit more time to research to give you the best answer possible, then I'll acknowledge the question and we'll come back to that in a future month's episode. You may be watching this after it's finished, so if that is the case, then you can still leave your question in the comment section. Again, I will take note of that question and come back to it in a future month. Or you might be listening to this on audio. So if that's the case, either jump over to YouTube and leave your question there in the comments, or you can send me an email. So it's chris@nevertooldtolift.com. So that's chris@nevertooldtolift.com. And I welcome any questions by email. And then again, I will then use those questions or answer those questions in the next month's live Q&A episode. Now, before I get into the first question that I've had in this month, I wanted to let you know of a contest that I'm running. I am offering a place on my course, Stronger for Life. That's where it's going to teach you how to build your own strength training program. You're going to get access to me via weekly group Zoom calls and access to the Facebook community group where everyone is really supportive, encourages each other and can help throw questions at each other to help support people through any sticking points they might have. But I'm going to run a contest where you can win a place on that course. All you need to do is leave a review on the podcast player that you listen to this on. So whether that's Apple, Spotify, or any of the other podcast players, if you can send me a screenshot of the review that you leave and send that to chris@nevertooldtolift.com, I will then enter you into the draw and I'll pick the winner out at the end of February. So this will run up until, if you can get your review in before the end of February, I will then do that on the 1st of March. And there'll also be 5 runner-up prizes of the paperback copy of my book, Never Told to Lift, to those who don't win. But again, as a reminder, screenshot of your review on the podcast player to chris@nevertooldtolift.com. But good. So for today, I'll get straight into the first question that I had. And that was, my shoulder limits me from doing back squats. What are my other options? So this was actually someone who saw me in the clinic and wanted to find out a little bit more about how she can work around this problem. And a bit more context for you. She's someone who had previously had a frozen shoulder. And although it settled, she never quite got the full range of motion back, and she kind of classed it about 90% of the movement she had. And when we came on to looking at back squats, so that's where the bar is rested across your back, so the longer barbell, and then you can hold that there and go into your squats and then rack that back into the bar. When we were in the squat rack and we were trying to get in position, the only way she could just about hold the bar, but she had to contort her body in order to be able to grab it safely. And it was really uncomfortable. And as soon as she tried to lift the bar up and hold it in position, it was too uncomfortable to even concentrate on doing a squat. So she had to come back in. And she wanted to know what her other options were going to be. And I wanted to talk with her a few options, but also a couple of bits of equipment that you could use and a little workaround if your gym doesn't have that equipment. So the first thing you can do, what I normally get people to start with when they're first starting squats and they don't have the barbells available, or they just don't have the confidence to walk into the kind of that section of a gym yet, is you can use dumbbells down by your side. So you just hold a dumbbell in each hand, down by your side, or you can kind of rest them just up where your shoulders are. And that allows you to have this additional weight that's in addition to your body weight that you can perform your squats with. And we're starting to challenge the muscles a little bit more in order to get them stronger. Problem with this is you'll get to a point where your grip strength starts to give out quicker than your legs start to reach fatigue. And if that's the case, we're now not really challenging your legs enough to build strength because we're limited by your grip strength, which is why the barbell back squat is brilliant, because the weight is all just rested on your back. You're not having to hold it there with your arms. You're not limited by the strength in any of your upper body. It's just you're holding it there so you can really challenge your legs. The same is true for some people use like a hex bar, which is the hexagonal bar that you stand in and you hold the bar down by your side. But we've got the same problem there, that eventually your grip strength is likely to limit you. Then if you're doing this in a gym, the leg press machine is a fantastic option because it kind of replicates that squat based action, but you're nice and supported. You have your arms are down by your side. You haven't got to worry about holding a bar or worry about the balance side of things. And for a lot of people, particularly at the beginner stages, leg press is a fantastic option. The only hesitation, or the sort of the pros and cons, if we're looking at the cons, is it doesn't really challenge the balance element to it. And combining the strength from the squat that you're doing with the fact you've got to maintain balance during that squat really has some benefits to it that you just don't get from a leg press machine. So the other option you might have, and I'm going to bring a photo up on screen for those watching on YouTube, and I'll do my best to describe it for those on audio, is using what we call a safety bar. So this safety bar is effectively, you still got the bar that goes behind the back, but you've got two struts, sort of metal bars that come forwards from that main bar that are shoulder width apart, that come down in front of you, in front of your shoulders, and there's a couple of handles that you can grab at the end of that bar. Most of them, as the one in the picture, have padding on the two forward struts, as well as the middle part that goes behind your neck. But the beauty of it is that if you're holding the handles that are now sort of sticking down just in front of you, and if you look, for those watching on YouTube, look at my upper arms. My upper arm is directly down in line with my body. They're directly down vertically with my elbows tucked in at my side. So my arm hasn't had to move at all. I've not had to try and twist my shoulder. I've not had to lift it up in the air. My shoulder can stay in a position that we know it's comfortable in. And then my hands are just holding the bar. They're not having to really do anything. They're just stopping the bar from tipping backwards. The bar is just resting on my shoulder, on top of my shoulders and my neck, or that upper back region. And the hands are just stabilizing to stop it tipping. And now from there, I can securely do a squat without having to worry about the bar and then worry about my shoulder hurting because it's an uncomfortable position. So the safety bars are fantastic bits of a kit to use when you're doing strength training if you happen to have shoulder mobility issues. Or for a lot of people in the gym who don't, I tend to favour using the safety bar because a lot of people find it just a lot more secure. They feel more confident with it than they do with a straight bar on their back. I am lucky enough that I do have one of these in my clinic. Unfortunately, they're not as common as I'd like to see in a lot of gyms. Some of them, they are existed, but because no one really knows what they are or how to use them, they're kind of hidden away in the back. So do kind of ask the gym staff there whether you've got one in there. A lot of gym staff can actually be, or gym managers are quite good. If you go up to them and say, I've had this issue with my shoulder, I'd like to do more in the gym, but this is my limiting factor at the moment. Is there any opportunity you would go out and get one for the gym? I've had patients who've asked, and within a couple of weeks, the gym manager's gone out and sourced one, because in the grand scheme of things, they're fairly inexpensive for gyms to be able to get in. And if it attracts more people into their gym because they've thought about limitations people have to work around, then it's only a positive for them. If not, I found this week a post on Instagram that showed a really ingenious way of working around the problem to kind of almost effectively make your own safety bar yourself. So again, I'm going to bring a photo up on screen, This is a screenshot of that Instagram reel that I saw. And this was from Dustin Jones, who, if any regular listeners may recognise, he was on the podcast a few months ago. And he teaches other physiotherapists how to introduce strength training to older adults. And this was a video I think offers one of his courses. But what he's done here is he's got a normal straight bar, and he's got the person he's working with to wrap a towel around each side of the bar just outside the shoulders, with two parts of the towel coming forwards, and he's then gripping the person on there is gripping the towel, and he's able to then kind of pull against that to pull the bar back in towards him. So again, it's that stopping it tipping backwards. Now, I'll admit, when I watched the video for the first time, and I've linked the video in the description below, and for anyone listening, this will be on the show notes page if you want to if you can't quite visualize what I'm mentioning here. But I was a bit dubious as to how stable this would feel, particularly for someone who might be older, who's not fully confident with a bar, to then have the setup as I've mentioned and you see in the video. I thought it'd feel really unstable, but I was really surprised just how stable I felt doing this. And I did reach out to Dustin to ask a little bit more about how stable people find it and how the grip is on the towels. And he said the towels are his preferred method because they're a bit thicker, but they've naturally got friction to them. They're easier for people to hold as they're doing this. And you can really kind of get that force to pull that bar back in against you so you feel extra stable. You can also do this with lifting straps. And again, that's what I tried in the clinic, and that felt really stable as well. But it's worth looking at. I would probably say if you're doing this for the first time, not fully confident with the straight bar anyway, I wouldn't do it on your own. I'd have someone around you just to check and make sure you feel safe with it. But it's a fantastic workaround for any gym that doesn't have a safety bar, or if you've got a home setup and you don't have a safety bar and you want to be able to do a back squat but you're limited by your shoulder mobility, then it's a brilliant workaround. So do have a look at that. Like I say, I've linked to that video below, and I highly recommend you go and follow Dustin on Instagram anyway. And I've also linked to the episode that Dustin had with me with that interview, because he gives some other brilliant strategies that you can take a lot of information from that interview. So do have a look at that as well. So that's the first question. So second question that came in was an email I received, and it says, "Hello, I have been diagnosed with cervical spondylolisthesis, and would I be able to weight train? I'm a 68-year-old male. Thank you." So I thought twice about whether I answer this question or not in sort of generally on the podcast, or whether I got back to him separately. I will bring it up here, but I do want to be very cautious with my answer. And my first answer would be, I would go and see a physiotherapist about this and just make sure, because with spondylosis and spondylolisthesis, which I'll talk about in a second, there's quite a wide range it's kind of wide spectrum, and symptoms can be very individual. And also, this person, I don't know if they've got much history with weight training before, and whether they're new to it and there'd be a gradual build, or whether they were kind of hoping to step in and they've kind of been a previous bodybuilder, and in their expectations of what weight training is might be completely different. So any advice I'll give here is very general advice. Please don't kind of use this as a substitute for individualized medical advice. I would suggest going to speak to a physiotherapist first. But in general, yes, you would be able to weight train. We do want to build some strength. So if we were looking at, as a physiotherapist, we're looking for the conservative management of spondylolisthesis. Strengthening exercises are included within that. But to step back a moment first, so there's a lot of people that might be listening or watching that don't know what spondylolisthesis is. And it sits on a bit of a spectrum, and it kind of starts with what we call spondylosis. And what that is, it's kind of the general degeneration in the joints of the spine. It's the sort of general wear and tear that is very similar to arthritis in the hip and the knee. And just like with arthritis in the hip and the knee, they can be mild to moderate to severe. And the level of pain or discomfort and the symptoms you experience aren't necessarily correlated with mild means you're going to get a little bit of pain and no symptoms, and moderate means you're going to get loads of it. Someone who's got really mild arthritis on an x-ray can have really severe symptoms, and someone who's got really sort of severe arthritis can actually be fairly pain-free or very minimal symptoms. So pain can vary from one to another, and that will affect your ability to be able to do things. But as the level of that spondylosis progresses, you can often get to a point where it moves into this spondylolisthesis, which is what this person has been diagnosed with. And that's where you get a little bit of forward movement of one vertebra on top of another. And they call it this slippage. And some of the ligaments and tendons have become a little bit lax, and there's a little bit less stability around that joint. So what we want to be cautious of is there's some movements that we want to be cautious of as we're doing any kind of management or exercises around that. But like I say, with the strengthening, effectively, if we can strengthen the muscles around that joint, we are creating a natural scaffolding that's going to make that joint and the spine more stable again. So we do want to build some strength, because we don't want to be so scared of it that we avoid doing everything. And the weaker we get, the more we decondition, and the less muscle strength you have in general, the more it opens you up to other issues, and it's more associated with other health complaints, which I've talked about in the past. The big thing I would work on here is particularly, so cervical spondylolisthesis is referring to the neck. The other common place you have this is in the lower back, so you get lumbar spondylolisthesis. We really want to avoid loading in the extreme ranges of motion, which for the neck isn't actually that common within strength training anyway. We generally want to keep the neck fairly neutral in the positions. We don't want to be looking up excessively when we're doing exercises. We don't want to do much in the terms of the rotation with those the strength-based training exercises that we talked about. But the one I would probably avoid is the back squat, where we've talked about in the last question, where we've got the bar resting across the top of the shoulders and the base of the neck. I would go for another option, whether it's a leg press machine, whether you're using dumbbells down by your side. And that's probably the first thing there. I'd probably avoid, and this is probably more for the lumbar one, but any kind of back extensions or anything where you're kind of on your front, say, pushing yourself up into an extended position. Equally, I probably wouldn't do a full sit-up if it was a lumbar one, but equally for the neck, because you tend to kind of overly strain and with your chin in by your neck. So again, it's anything where you're taking it to the extremes of movement. I wouldn't do any heavy rotational work with it, particularly if you're taking it to the end of that rotation. Anything where you're a bit more in that kind of neutral position, you're kind of halfway between the two extremes of motion, and we can strengthen in that range, then that's where I'd focus on a little bit more. Deadlifts from the floor, if you've got the lumbar issue, I probably wouldn't do them right from the floor. I'd maybe work on what we call rack pulls, where you're doing kind of half depth ones. You might even start with bridges first and maybe the hip thrusters. But again, this is all very individualized depending on the ability level you're coming into this with, what your experience is in the past, what your current symptoms are. So I wouldn't experiment with any of this on your own. I would go and speak to a physiotherapist, particularly one who, if you look at their website and their marketing, they're more of an exercise-based physio, because most of them will be, but there are some that are a bit more focused more just on the hands-on and don't have a huge amount of experience with the exercise base. But yeah, go and speak to someone first, get some guidance on it. But yeah, the general advice on here is, yes, we can do some muscle strengthening exercise. Whether it looks exactly like the kind of workout that you were hoping for, it may or may not do. But to give you hope, yes, building strength around that joint is going to create a more stable neck that's going to help hopefully reduce your symptoms and give you a better management of this going forwards. Good, so I hope that's answered that. If anyone does have any follow-up questions from any of these, or you are watching this live and you've got any questions that you'd like answered, then please do use the chat feature and leave any questions there. Or a reminder, if you are watching this afterwards, do leave a comment below and I'll answer that in a future month's episode. Or if you are listening to this, then again, it's chris@nevertooletolift.com and you can send me your questions there. Next question that came in, and I've got this one and then two more that have come in advance, and then if any come in live. But yeah, this question is, my partner wants to start strength training with me, but we're at completely different fitness levels. Can we do the same program? So firstly, this is fantastic that your partner's been inspired to start strength training with you or doing some gym work with you. And yeah, certainly something I would encourage, because it's going to make it much easier for your partner to come with you and be supported and have that accountability of going with you than trying to do this all on their own. So yeah, certainly I'd do that. And the short answer is yes, you can do the same program despite the fact you're at different fitness levels. And I thought I'd talk about the classes that I run at my clinic as a bit of an example about how this might look or how it might work. So in my physiotherapy clinic in Birmingham in the UK, I have classes that I run 2 evenings a week. And in each class, because of the size of the clinic, I can have 5 people in there. And within that class, the 5 people are each in their own stations. There's 5 different stations that people rotate around, and each station is a different movement pattern. So for example, station number 1 might be some form of the squat movement pattern. Station number 2 might be some form of a vertical press, like a shoulder press. Station 3 might be some form of a horizontal pull, where that's kind of that pull movement pattern where you come in towards you, and then the other 2 might be something different again. Most people who are in that class have seen me because they have had an injury that we've worked through, and they now want to, I kind of build strengthening work into their treatment, but they're now in a point where they want to carry that on, but they're still a little bit nervous around their existing injury. And someone might have come in for a shoulder injury, and someone else might be a knee, someone else might be their back. So everyone has their own concerns they're coming in with, their own restrictions. They might still have a few symptoms still. So it means their starting point is very different. So as people work from one movement station to another, the reason each station is a movement pattern and not a set exercise is because within each movement pattern, you can have different exercise variations. So for what one person in the class does, it's completely different to someone else, which is completely different from the third person. And as they move on to the next movement pattern, again, someone else is doing a different variation of the person in front of them. And so the way that I do it, everyone kind of rotates round, and we have a set period of time as where they're fitting in their sets and reps. And so this is how that it could look. So you could take the program that you're doing and work with your partner to see, can they do the variation of the exercise that you're doing? If they can, they're probably just going to start with a lower weight and you're using a higher weight, and that's absolutely fine. And you might have to work out how you're going to juggle that within a session. Do you keep in between sets changing the weights, and people do that? Or do you have a different station next door where you're doing the same thing just with different weights? Or you might be doing it with a barbell, they're doing it with dumbbells, etc. Or if you can't do the same variation of the exercise, you might just be doing a different variation. And again, you can look at, if you're looking at squats, what are the different squat variations? We talked a little bit in that first question. It might be that you're doing your back squat while your partner's doing leg press, something along those lines. But yeah, it's certainly possible. It needs a little bit more thought to do the same program if you're different fitness levels. But that's the way I would look at it, is just look at different variations of the same exercises that you're already doing and using different weights or resistance or loads with those. As another analogy, it works. It's very similar to Pilates. If you've ever been to a Pilates class, is normally with each exercise within a Pilates class, there's 5 different levels, or up to 5 different levels of that exercise. And level 1 is the easiest. Level 5 is the most extreme and the hardest. And there's the other levels in between. So when the instructor says, right, now we're going to do this exercise, they'll often describe the different levels to the exercises, and then everyone in their class gets going with the level that they know they're comfortable with and they can do. So you can have people in a Pilates class from beginners to fairly advanced, all following the instructor, doing the same exercise, but they're doing a different variation of the same exercise. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But again, I would very much encourage this and try and not get put off by the fact you're different fitness levels. Try and use this approach, and hopefully that will keep your partner going. If it's something they're not familiar with, you want them to have as much support, and if that support is the accountability of going with you, then we want to find a way of making the program work. Good. So next question, how much rest should I take between sets? I've hidden some of the question off there. So it says, I've heard anything from 30 seconds to 3 minutes. So the first part of this is, yes, we do need rest in between sets of exercises. So again, basics here. If a repetition is a repetition of the exercise you're doing, so say you're doing squats and you're aiming for 8 repetitions, you're doing 8 squats and then you're stopping and having a break. That is your first set of 8 repetitions of a squat. After your break, you go into another set of 8 repetitions. You've now done 2 sets of 8. And then normally we're doing somewhere between 3 and 5 sets. And the key to that is we're having a rest in between those sets. With strength training, ideally we're going to take the muscles to the point of muscular fatigue when we're doing an exercise. So the last repetition you do is pretty much the last repetition you could have managed. Because if you could have carried on, so say you got to 8 and you could really have done another 5 or 6 really easily, you are not pushing your muscles sufficiently to actually build any strength. So if that was the case, I'd still take a rest, but the next set you do, you'd increase the weight up and try and get to a point where you could, if you finished 8, you could maybe have done 1 or 2 more, but definitely no more than that. And then say we want to have this rest before going into the next one, because if you barely took 10 seconds rest and you went straight into the next set, you've effectively just done one big set of 16, which means you certainly weren't anywhere near that fatigue point, and therefore not going to get any stronger for it. So with the rest, partly it depends on how many repetitions you're doing and how heavy the weight is, because you might start at, say, 15 repetitions, and this is what I tend to recommend with people, is you start with a lighter weight trying to reach fatigue at 15 repetitions, and then as you build your confidence up over the weeks, you increase the weight to try and get to fatigue within 5 repetitions. So you need a much bigger weight in order to be able to do that. But it's a lot heavier, so it's a lot more strenuous to do that, to reach fatigue with only a few repetitions. So if you're reaching fatigue at 15 repetitions, you're looking for somewhere between a minute to a minute and a half, ideally a minute and a half. If you're working with a weight big enough that you reach fatigue within 5 repetitions, you actually want a little bit longer. So yeah, somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes. Generally 2 minutes is sufficient, but some people do wait a little bit longer. And this can be quite frustrating because often people go to the gym and want to be efficient with their use of time in the gym. So they end up, they wait about 30 seconds thinking it's been 2 minutes and they just jump straight back in again. And so sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes feels like an eternity sometimes when you just want to be getting on with things. And particularly if you're conscious that other people are waiting for the equipment, or because a lot of people get frustrated with people who are sitting on the phones in between sets, but actually they're just killing time in between that rest period. I have a strategy that I tend to use with people I work with is pairing up exercises that work different muscle groups. So you might have a leg-based exercise where you're pushing some of the muscles in your legs to fatigue, but in that minute and a half to sort of 2 to 3 minute rest, you're then doing a different exercise that utilizes, say, maybe the shoulders. You're doing a shoulder press, and because you could be sat down whilst doing your shoulder press, and your legs are still recovering from the squats they may have just done, whilst your shoulders are getting worked, and then whilst your shoulders are recovering, you can go back and do your set of squats. And I say this way you can be a lot more efficient with the use of time in the gym. If you're finding you get very breathless with it, you might just need to do one exercise, focus on 3 sets of that with the 1.5 to 2 minutes in between before you move on again. But yeah, it can vary widely. I think 30 seconds probably isn't enough rest. Minute to minute and a half is a minimum rest I'd take if you're reaching muscular fatigue. If you haven't reached muscular fatigue, you can take a shorter rest. But next set, you do want to try and increase the weight you're using to get to a point where you do get close to that fatigue. And then let's say once you're at that point, you do need longer rests in between. And then we also need to think about rest in between workout days. Is if you have successfully pushed your muscles to fatigue within a workout, you ideally don't want to be pushing the same groups of muscles to fatigue again the next day. You want to leave it at least a day in between before you come back to that workout again. And that doesn't mean complete rest. You can be doing other things. You can be doing some other class like Pilates, yoga, swimming, some sport. But I wouldn't do the same workout again. And if you are going to the gym 5-6 days a week, that's where people move into, rather than full body workouts every workout, they go into this leg day, push day, pull day. So while the legs are recovering, on the next day they're just working their push muscles, and then the day after they're working the pull muscles, and then the legs have had 2 days rest to go back into the gym again to work the legs again. So if you are going more regularly and a bit more advanced, that's an approach you can take to make sure you're getting rests in between workouts. But if you're doing 2 to 3 full body sessions a week, rather than do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you would be looking at Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a day into the weekend, and just trying to make sure you have a day's rest in between. Good, so that was that question. And then the last question that I have in is, I'm a vegetarian and struggle with protein. Are protein shakes necessary, or can I get enough from food? I always start any of these nutritional based questions with the same caveat that I am a physiotherapist, and I like to stay kind of within my lane as a physio and not venture too far out my scope of practice. So with nutrition based questions coming in, I can give a little bit of general advice, but what I would suggest is taking a listen to the episode that I did with Jackie Lynch last week. So Jackie Lynch is a menopause nutritionist. She has written books. She's got 4 books, including The Happy Menopause, and another one more recently, The Happy Menopause Guide to Energy. She is the host of a podcast of the same name, so it's the Happy Menopause Podcast. And she's got her own clinic as well, which you can reach out to her, where she can do sessions over the phone as well. But she talked a lot about protein and the importance of it, particularly going through menopause and being interested in building muscle strength. Is a lot of women aren't getting enough protein. And then we did talk about the struggles of being vegetarian and vegan at the same time. But a general concept, she said, whatever protein source that you're trying to get, she recommends having a kind of fist-size portion of that protein source. So whether that, for anyone who is eating meat, whether it's your chicken or any meat source that you've got there. she said the advantages of animal protein is they are kind of complete protein sources, whereas some of the vegetable-based sources are they're incomplete sources of protein, so you have to look for your sources from more places. Again, I don't want to talk too much about that. I would recommend listening to the episode, but some of the things she talks about, you can get protein sources from sort of soy, tofu, edamame beans, hemp, chia seeds, quinoa, things along those lines. But yeah, what I would say is do go and have a listen to the episode. I have linked to that below. She's absolutely brilliant, and she's not only was she really articulate the way she brought along all her messages, but her messaging was really simple. There was no counting calories. She didn't want to complicate anything along those lines. She talked very much in simple terms and simple strategies that you can follow to make sure you're getting enough protein. Because the other part of the question, are protein shakes necessary? She thought for most people, they don't need to be at all, unless you're a bodybuilder who is, you're performing at a kind of a more elite level where you need that additional protein that you can't get enough from the diet, then that's where they're really helpful. They can have their place if you're struggling to get it, but generally just adjusting the diet is the most important part of this, because with that you get all the other macronutrients and you can build in some of the other micronutrients as well. But yeah, fantastic episode. It's one of the interviews I've enjoyed the most. So do take a look at that. So that was episode 40 of the Never Taught to Lift podcast. And again, I've linked to that in the description in the show notes. But good. So that is all the questions that have come in today. So as a reminder, if you want to enter that contest to win a place on the course, on Stronger for Life, where you get the access to me via weekly group Zoom calls, you get all the video-based course, and you want to learn how to put together a program, then just simply leave a review on your podcast player, take a screenshot of that review, and you can email that to me at chris@nevertoldtolift.com. And then as long as that comes in before the end of February, then I will then pick out a name and we'll have a winner there. And then 5 runners up will also get my book, Never Told to Lift. And then if you have any questions and you want me to answer it in next month's Q&A session, then please do send me an email with your question or leave it in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. But for now, I will see you in next week's episode.